Hi, I'm Mitch Gallagher. Welcome to the Sweetwater Minute. A while back, we shot a case study video of how I built my home studio. We talked about the acoustic design, how the studio was put together, the construction, basically the whole process from beginning to end. Now, when we posted that video, we got a lot of questions from viewers about the gear I was using in the studio and my hybrid approach to mixing, recording, and working with different instruments. So we thought we'd shoot a follow-up video, and I'd like to show you an excerpt from that video. We talk about how the gear came together for the studio, how I made my choices, the computers, the monitoring, everything that goes into designing the equipment setup for a studio. Let's take a look.
So, okay, we're going to spare everybody the 1 minute it took to pull this rack out here between us, but it is worth talking about this, and it's something we touched on in the video about the construction of your studio, is that you've got this rack that's easily movable that you can put next to where you perform with all your mic amps in it.
Right, yeah, it's on wheels. So you just roll, it's an Argosy rack and roll 10-space rack. And what I've run into in past studios is I'll be sitting with my acoustic guitar and sitting here at the desk trying to reach back and run preamps and trying to manage all of that while I have the guitar in my hands and there's microphones in front of me. It's just difficult. You could see that if I had a guitar now and I was trying to adjust things, it just doesn't work very well. Yeah. So my thought was, if I got a low profile rolling rack, I could be sitting with a guitar and I could quickly reach down and just tweak levels, and I'd be facing, I'd be turned around, so I'd be looking at the monitor, so I can see my levels on the screen, and I can be adjusting all that very easily.
Right.
And so it's an ergonomic choice to have it this way. And so I set this up to be able to just roll out and do that. And it actually, believe it or not, affected the preamps that I chose.
Huh.
Because my natural tendency, like microphones, is to collect everything.
Yep.
I want everything, and what works better for that than 500 series?
Yep.
I could have dozens of preamps in these 10 spaces and have all those choices and all those colors, which is great. I would love that. At the same time, when I'm sitting here with a guitar in my hand, what do I want? I want to be able to easily reach out and grab the big level knob and adjust it. And these all let me do that very easily. Full-size preamps let me do that. So that's, in a funny kind of way, was part of what led me to this type of preamp versus, say, a 500 series, which, again, I think are great. And I'd be happy to have a whole bunch of them. But for what I do here, this tends to be faster and easier for me to use.
Now, notice all of these, and you can talk about them specifically as you want to, but they're radically different from each other. They're pretty specific in what they do. They're kind of low tech. Like, I don't look at this rack and think, oh, each one of these is so versatile. I look at it and think, okay, well, that would be good on something.
Right.
Is that how you're kind of putting it together?
Yes and no.
Okay.
One thing that I like in a preamp is I like to be able to say, I could use this preamp to do everything.
Okay.
And I could plug a microphone into any one of these preamps and I could record everything and it would be fine.
Okay.
I'd be happy with the results.
Right on.
At the same time, I chose specific things that are focused toward the tasks that I do in this studio.
Gotcha.
And so, yes, that was an overriding concern, was to make sure that I had that. And it made no sense to me to have 3 preamps that were all great for recording electric guitar.
Right.
Instead, I chose the one that works for me, or one of them that works for me, because again, I don't want dozens of preamps in this situation. I would love to have that, but in the situation I'm in, it works better for me to have a selection that are all very different from each other and that they do specific things. So yes, I went through that whole process of setting this up. You want to go through?
Do you want to talk about which one do you like to record guitar with, electric guitar?
Any of them.
Okay.
They all work great for that. And, and it is funny because sometimes people think you have to have a colored preamp to do electric guitar.
Yeah,
right. You can't have a transparent preamp, but sometimes a transparent preamp like the Millennium works great. It's the perfect thing.
It's the song, ultimately.
Exactly, and the tone, and the microphone, and how you're miking and all that stuff. Having said that, the first one I reach for is a Pacifica.
Okay.
It tends to have presence to it. It tends to have whatever the punchiness is that really tends to work well with the microphones that I have. The Royers in particular, and the dynamic mics when they put them in front of a cabinet. Now that preamp, it's not like it's so dramatically colored that it just washes over everything. It has a color and a tone that works well for that. Also works well for steel string guitar, works well for vocals. So it can be a general purpose kind of a thing, but this is the first one I reach for with electric guitar. Also has a great sounding DI. So for a clean bass DI, plugging straight into that works really well.
Cool, good.
All right. The Millennium, on the other hand, is my classical recording preamp. This is people think of this as a transparent, straight wire with gain kind of thing. I think is the way that people describe them. And it is. It's a very, very clean preamp. It doesn't add a lot of coloration to it, but it's not sterile sounding.
Right.
And there are a lot of great clean preamps out there. I happen to like the Millennias. It works really well for me. I have a stereo one here. The Pacifica is also stereo for doing guitars, but this is stereo, so I can put my two Omnis up and capture classical guitar, or two cardioids, or two large diaphragms, or whatever. But this is everything I said about versatility. This is a surprisingly versatile preamp. It sounds good on everything, because it just doesn't. What the microphone captures is what it gives you, and that's a really nice thing. In certain cases, it's very dynamic, it's extremely quiet, has lots of gain, and so it does cover a lot of bases for me. But the first thing I would reach for with this is acoustic guitar, classical guitar, maybe some percussion, those kind of things where I want a lot of detail, a lot of dynamics, and an intimacy.
You're touching on something that we often try to impress upon customers is, I mean, these are all four phenomenal preamps here. They're incredible. And you can buy any one of these and make an awesome recording with it. And that's because of the quality of what they are. And rather than thinking, oh, I've got to buy all this stuff, it's like, if you're starting out, buy a really good something or other and get acquainted with what that quality is giving you.
Right.
And then maybe at some point you add another one and another one, like you've probably done.
Where were you when I was starting out?
Yeah, well,
Because I've spent money on preamps 4 times now getting to this point.
I had to figure all that out too. I was doing the same thing. We probably should have just been trading gear.
Yeah, exactly. So you go through all the stages, which is fine too, because you learn a lot doing that. You learn what you don't like, you learn what you want in things. But a great preamp and a great microphone, you're 90% of the way there.
Right.
You know, well, maybe not 90. Gear-wise, you're 90% of the way there. The rest of it is learning where to place it, and the performance and all of that kind of stuff is a whole other issue. But gear-wise, you're 90% of the way there.
Right. Anything else, like vocals, for instance?
Yeah. So I have 2 single-channel preamps. The Vintech X73 is sort of touted as a Neve replica. They tried to recreate the Neve 1073. So it's a preamp, but it also has a built-in equalizer, and it's got filters on it as well, and it's got an output control, so you can drive that and get a little bit of grit out of it too. It has a pretty distinctive tone. You know, it's Neve-ish kind of a thing. I was really not that worried about trying to find the most exact clone of a 1073 anyway.
It's just a vibe.
It's a vibe, and I find it's just a good preamp for single channel stuff, whether it's vocals, whatever it might be. When I put a microphone up, this is one that I'll plug into first and give that a try and see if it's the sound that I want, or if I can tweak the EQ. I do like having that EQ capability on at least a couple of my preamps to be able to dial in a little bit at not the source, but very early in the chain before it actually goes down. So if there's something that's bothering me, I can hear it, I can dial that right away. And I use this EQ more for kind of broad shaping. It's not for surgical kind of stuff that you would do later with plugins and things. But having that analog EQ on the way in, I think, is really valuable. And you can switch it in and out so you can compare. And so this is a good general purpose preamp for that type of stuff, because it has that EQ, but I find it works very well for a lot of vocal stuff as well.
Good. And do you want to talk about the UA?
Sure. The LA610 I've had for a long time. Actually, both the LA610 and the Pacifica I've had for many, many years. I reviewed both of those for EQ Magazine when I worked there, and I've had them ever since because they work great for me.
Yeah.
So this combines a tube preamp with a 2-band EQ, and then it also has an optical compressor.
Yeah.
So it's basically a channel strip, a tube-based channel strip, and it's quite colored. You know, it's designed after the old 610 console, the Bill Putnam thing, and it has that sound that's fat, it's warm, it's rich, it's a little bit fuzzy. I find it works. This is my go-to bass DI.
Okay.
Plug a bass into this, I've got a little bit of compression, I can tweak the EQ a little bit. It has impedance selection, so you can match a passive bass if you're working with that, or different microphones. And people may be surprised at this, this is also where I go for vocals a lot. So I'll run a vocal microphone into that. I've got a little bit of just real broad high and low EQ. You got that warmth and that fat sound that comes from this. It's very dynamic, and so I love this preamp. You know, a lot of people will talk about, well, you should have the Mark II, and the Mark II does have more headroom, a little cleaner, and those things. But the Mark I has worked great for me, and so I already have it. I'm not going to update at that point. But yeah, the Mark II is even better.
Yeah, they're really
as far
awesome.
as that goes. So yeah, this is a great preamp. So I only have 6 channels of preamps.
Yep.
But again, look at what I do in my room. Most of what I do is stereo miking or mono miking. Occasionally, I'll do a pair of close-up mics on a guitar and a pair of distant mics, in which case I probably put the Pacifica to work. Or if I have to, the way that I'm set up here is I have my inputs. The first 6 inputs here are feeding directly into the preamp, so I don't have to go behind the rack. So I can just plug my microphones in. These two inputs are actually line inputs that go straight into the audio interfaces.
Oh, okay.
So I can bring a pair of preamps in here and put them right in here, and they show up directly in the interface. So I call those my guest inputs.
Gotcha.
Because I review gear here as well.
Yeah,
All the stuff for Sweetwater. I do the Sweetwater Minute product reviews, the hands-on reviews for InSync, for Sweet Notes. All that stuff happens here. So having to tear the studio apart to plug a preamp in is not my idea of fun.
Yep.
So having a couple of guest inputs, and I may actually expand it. I've got 4. These are just blank at this point. And I may run those just straight in. I've got enough inputs in my interface to where I have even more guest stuff because it's convenient to be able to do that.
Yeah.
So 6 preamps covers me. I can do my vocals, I can do my bass, I can do classical, acoustic, steel string guitar, I can do electric guitars, I can do percussion. If I have a couple of people here, I've had 3 people here where we did a bass and we did a guitar and we did a vocalist at the same time. I've got plenty of inputs to cover that. And so for what I do, this is what covers me.
That's awesome.
The hard part is resisting, because there's so many cool preamps and they're all so great. There's so many great choices, and the option anxiety, you know, what preamp should I get? What preamp should I get? You know, and so if you come back next week, maybe it'll be something different. But you know, right now I'm trying to work with these choices right here.
Good. So these are awesome, but let's expand the concept a little bit. Obviously, many of our customers and many of us at times have to record more than 6 things. They may have to do a whole band.
Yeah.
So what would your recommendation be for how to go down that path?
If I had a band come in here and say, you know what, we'll set up in the garage and run mic cables down to the studio or whatever, or out in the rest of the basement or something, what I would do is I've got light pipe inputs into the Apollo 16s. There are 8-channel mic preamps that have light pipe out. Audient, for example, makes one. Focusrite. You know, there are a variety of them out there. So I would look at something like that as just a group of preamps. But you just expand the selection.
Yeah.
And so maybe you look at a preamp that works great on kick drum and on snare drum. If you're doing bands all the time, you just expand what I did. You know, and you need more channels. And I think the interesting thing there is to consider whether you're going to take a console approach or whether you're going to take a piecemeal approach.
Right.
You know, because I came up in the music that I grew up on, without dating myself too much, was the music of the 70s and the 80s.
Yeah.
And that music was recorded on consoles, so everything went through the same preamp. There were no standalone preamps, or very few standalone preamps in those days, right?
That's right.
And so there's all this stuff about, and I'm guilty of it myself, of saying, well, you can't do everything with the same preamp because this frequency will build up and it ruins everything and the world might end. You know, and that's just not true. I mean, you can use the same preamp for everything. So there would be nothing wrong with having 24 channels of Pacifica to record your rock band, or 24 channels of Millennia to do your orchestra, which people do all the time.
Sure.
At the same time, there's a lot of beauty in saying, you know what, I want the Pacifica for my electric guitar, and on the other electric guitar, I'm going to put a Chandler, and I'm going to have Millennias for my overheads, and for the snare drum and the kick drum, I'm going to use the Shadow Hills, and I've got API for my toms, and I've got the vocalist is going through this tube tech channel, and you know, all those choices where you can really dial it in and get the perfect thing to match with your perfect microphone, with the perfect vocalist, and all the instruments and things. I mean, that is so cool.
Once you learn the distinctiveness of what they are, it really is cool to have all that stuff.
And that's an important point. That's, you know, learning what these things do and what they're capable of. Because I think you go on to the various forums and, you know, Pacifica's only for recording electric guitar. Well, no, it's great for acoustic guitar. It's great for vocals. It makes a great bass DI. You know, all the preamps can be used for anything, but they have strengths.
Right.
And so you find the ones that work to the strengths that you need and that complement the other gear that you have, and I think you're in good shape. So it's really just a matter of expanding it and choosing whether you're going to say, I'm going to try and get a sound of 24 API preamps in a console, or I'm going to piecemeal it together and get all these different paint colors that I can kind of dial in. As we mentioned earlier, microphones are probably the biggest source of the tonal coloration, but preamps are the next level, I think.
Right.
I mean, there's a gap there, I think. I don't think it's as dramatic, but it is there.
Yeah.
There is a difference between them.
Yeah, right on.
I hope you enjoyed this excerpt from our case study on how to choose equipment for your recording studio. In the full video, which is posted to YouTube on our Facebook page and also at InSync, you'll find a complete discussion of everything that goes into equipment for a studio. Everything from microphones to monitoring, computers, interfaces, instruments, software, everything's covered in that video. I hope you find it enjoyable, and I hope you find it informative. I'm Mitch Gallagher.